Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think is one of the best changes that Game of Thrones made that wasn't in the books. This being the fight between Jaime and Ned in Season 1. Today, we're going to talk about how it went down in the books, why I think it was such a good change for the show, as well as a bit of the motivations behind Jaime wanting to fight Ned so badly. This was established pretty early on in the show that Jaime really did want to cross swords with Ned Stark even before he had the excuse of Tyrion being kidnapped. In the first meeting between these two, Jaime actually talks about fighting Ned in a tournament at some point, and that's when Ned Stark drops the line that he doesn't fight in tournaments, because if he fights a man for real, he doesn't want him to know what he can do. This, of course, foreshadows the fight that they eventually do have, but this was a surprise even to book readers because in the books, what actually happens in that scene is basically like what happens in House of the Dragon when Daemon scares the horse that his wife is sitting on, and she falls and gets injured. Jaime and his men still ambush Ned in the same way, coming out of a brothel after he's been investigating things with Littlefinger. But what happens is he scares the horse that Ned is sitting on, and then Ned gets his leg broken when the horse falls on it, and then that's the end of the confrontation. Now, I think pretty much everyone would agree that it's much better television to have them sword fight and then have Ned get stabbed in the leg the way that he does, rather than having him get the same injury from a horse falling right at the beginning of the scene. Now, some book readers have theorized, as they do any time an animal is acting weird or has a significant impact on the plot or the timeline, that perhaps this is Bloodraven or time traveling Bran that has warged into this horse and caused it to injure Ned's leg. Perhaps it was important to the timeline that Ned has his leg broken here, perhaps it was important to the timeline that they don't cross swords in the street, or perhaps it was actually just the fact that the horse got scared because it's a horse and it's suddenly being surrounded by a bunch of angry people in a tight little space, and horses sometimes do get spooked. Whatever the case is, we didn't get that cool scene where they have a big sword fight and then one of the Lannister guards stabs Ned in the back of the leg, and then Jaime goes over and punches that dude directly in his face. And it really is that last part of the scene that I want to talk about so badly because I think it is really, really cool and really crucial to showing something about Jaime's character. He didn't want to just fight Ned Stark, he wanted to beat him in a fair fight to prove something to himself. Obviously, Jaime and Ned have a very confrontational relationship, and honestly, Jaime has some pretty good reason to hate Ned Stark. We, of course, find out a lot more about that later on in the famous scene, by what right does the wolf judge the lion? Jaime has basically been branded the Kingslayer for life and deemed a dishonorable person by Ned Stark and many others because of the way that Ned found him sitting there in the throne room having just killed the Mad King, a king who Ned himself was rebelling against and would probably have ended up killing if he had the opportunity. This is, of course, the same king who had killed Ned Stark's father and brother and planned on killing the entirety of King's Landing if Jaime hadn't done what he did. Now, you could ask, as Brienne did, why didn't Jaime just tell Ned what had happened? Why didn't he tell him the truth? And Jaime said, do you think Ned Stark cared to hear my side? Basically, Ned Stark came in and harshly judged Jaime, who again was a very young and very proud teenager at this point, who had just done something very difficult for him, but it was, as we said, the correct thing. And then some guy comes in and basically just says, wow, what a terrible person you are. And I, maybe you as well, can sort of relate to the idea of being a young person who, if someone judges you harshly when you feel like you've done absolutely nothing wrong, you don't necessarily feel the need to suck up to them and gain their approval. You just say, oh, hey, screw that guy. What a D-bag. And I think that's basically Jaime's attitude toward Ned Stark. I'm not going to prove myself to you. I just did the best thing of my entire life. I did the right thing here, and you're coming in and crapping all over me for it. No, no, no. I'm not going to sit here and beg for your approval. So Jaime bites his tongue and becomes branded as the Kingslayer forever, and Ned Stark has a big role in that. The first scene where Tywin Lannister is introduced gives us a little bit more of an insight into that side of Jaime's character, where Tywin asks, doesn't it bother you when they say Kingslayer, Kingslayer? And Jaime says no, he doesn't care what anyone thinks of him, and Tywin directly calls him out, that's exactly what you want everyone to think of you. The truth is that it does bother Jaime, and you can see a more mature Jaime Lannister try and sort of have this conversation a decade plus later with Ned in the throne room in a different scene where they meet up. Jaime tries to bring up what a terrible person the Mad King was, You could say he doesn't do it necessarily in the most friendly or tactful way if he's actually trying to gain Ned Stark's approval, being like, hey, yo, bro, this is the room where your dad and brother got burned alive. He's still a bit confrontational in this interaction, but he does try to make the point that, hey, it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like justice killing the Mad King. He was a bad guy. Shouldn't you see this of all people? You should understand that he did terrible things. And Ned Stark basically just looks at him and says, hey, is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That you're some sort of servant of justice when you were stabbing an old man in the back, a man who you swore to protect? And I think this on some level does show a bit of a character flaw with Ned. He's unwilling to look past the rules and honor and what is sworn to be done and see what is actually the right thing to do when it goes against that. Another good example of this is shown directly in the very beginning of the story when he beheads the deserter from the Night's Watch who had seen the others. That is objectively the wrong thing to do if you're trying to protect the realm, trying to stop the others. He should have been taking that guy to the wall and being like, hey, we got to get to the bottom of this. What did this guy see that scared him so badly? Had Ned gone against what the law said he needed to do, he would be able to have figured out a lot more information about the others early on in the story, and perhaps Westeros could have been a little bit better prepared. I'm sure that I'll talk about this more in a future video I have planned about all of the little signs that have been there from the beginning that the old ways have been a problem, and this is definitely one of them. Ned Stark killing that deserter was definitely a bad choice, but it was the thing that he had sworn to do, and so he did it without thinking. When Ned is beheading the guy in the beginning of the story, he basically acts like the choice is completely out of his hands because he has sworn an oath and that's what the law says. He sort of views the choice also as completely out of Jaime's hands as to whether or not the Mad King should die, and Jaime going against the laws sort of supersedes the morals in Ned's mind. Now, there have been many people throughout history in our real world who have spoken out about this, how you basically should not actually follow laws that are unjust, and Martin Luther King has had some very good quotes about it, including saying that one who breaks an unjust law that conscience tells him is unjust is in reality expressing his highest respect for the law. And you could say in Jamie's case that that is what he's doing. He's breaking a law that he views as obviously unjust, and he's obviously doing the right thing, and that is in some way having the highest amount of respect for what is right and what the law should be, rather than what the law actually is as written. Jamie himself also, of course, talks about this how they make you swear to uphold all of these different things and they constantly conflict with one another. There's no way that anyone could actually upkeep all of the vows that you swear as a knight. Basically, all of this to say that Ned Stark is pretty wrong in how harshly he judges Jaime, and Jaime has pretty good reason to hate Ned Stark. But in fact, I would argue that all of this isn't even the most important reason for Jaime that he wants to beat Ned Stark in a sword fight one-on-one. Because, of course, proving that you're better with a sword than someone else doesn't prove that your philosophical points are more correct, or that your morals are better, or that you've lived your life in a better way. But still, there is something that it will prove to Jaime that I think he views as very important. I think that Jaime, in his mind, thinks that by beating Ned Stark, he can finally prove to himself that he is the greatest swordsman he's ever known, which is something that I think Jaime's ego cares about greatly. And that's why when he gets his chance to beat Ned in a fight 1v1 cut off by that guy stabbing Ned in the back of the leg, he goes over, looks disgusted, and punches that guy directly in the face. The chain of events that I'm going to talk about next is the reason that that punch in the face might, in fact, be one of my favorite character moments in the entirety of the show. This is something that the later seasons of the television show don't really express or go into, but it's very clear in the books when we're actually inside of Jaime's head. There is someone who Jaime will almost certainly always view as better than him with a sword. That's someone who he idolized as a child, who he got to work with when he joined the Kingsguard, and who he looked up to basically as he was becoming the best swordsman in Westeros, and that is Sir Arthur Dayne. Arthur Dayne was considered the greatest swordsman in the world and one of the most honorable members of the Kingsguard in history by basically everyone who knew him, and Jaime got to work right alongside him and see it firsthand. He watched him fight the Smiling Knight so well that the Smiling Knight's sword was getting all chipped up, and basically he allowed him to go get another sword to have an honorable fight, and then beat him anyway. Something that most people would definitely not do. If someone's weapon is getting dull or blunted or chipped, you just go in for the kill. Not Arthur Dayne, he was too cool for that. This battle between the Smiling Knight and Sir Arthur Dayne is something that I think had a very formative impact on a young Jaime Lannister. At one point in the books, when Jaime is particularly low on himself, he thinks that he had wanted as a young child to be Sir Arthur Dayne, but somewhere along the way he had become the Smiling Knight. Even all these years later, this is a lens through which Jaime views the world, and he knows deep down that he desired to be Sir Arthur Dayne. So Jaime not only wants to be the best swordsman in all of Westeros, but he wants to be the most honorable knight as well. This is what Sir Arthur Dayne was, and wanting to be Sir Arthur Dayne basically means wanting all of that. You can imagine a young Jaime Lannister how many times in training he would be being beaten by Arthur Dayne, and hoping that one day perhaps he would be good enough to actually beat the guy. However, this is of course not a chance that Jaime Lannister would ever get, because a few short years after Jaime joined the Kingsguard, Robert's Rebellion kicks off, and then Arthur Dayne is of course, as the legend says, killed by Ned Stark in single combat. So in a short period of time, Ned Stark kills Jaime Lannister's idol, and the man who Jaime looked up to, the man who Jaime wanted to be as good as one day. And to make matters worse, Jaime has to know that his idol has been killed by this man who, just before going to the Tower of Joy, was at King's Landing and who branded Jaime as dishonorable. So basically, Jaime has had both of those opportunities, both to be as good as Arthur Dayne with a sword and in terms of honor, taken away from him by Ned Stark. Then, to make matters worse for Jaime, he's never even going to get a chance to fight against Ned Stark because Ned isn't down in King's Landing, he isn't fighting in any tournaments that Jaime's fighting in and winning. Ned basically kills Arthur Dayne and then hangs up his sword whenever it's not needed and goes up to sit in Winterfell. This is basically like an MMA fighter taking the heavyweight championship and then taking the championship belt and retiring instantly after getting it. No one else ever gets a chance to defeat them. Or if you want to say, imagine yourself learning to play chess from a master, and then this master never loses a game, you're never able to beat them, but you work for years and years hoping that one day you'll be able to, and then you hear that your master has lost a chess game to some random guy you've never heard of before, and then that guy comes and makes a bit of fun of you, and then goes and retires from chess, never to play again, and then after that, your master unfortunately also dies. So you're never going to get a chance to prove that you're better than your master, and you're never going to get a chance to prove that you can beat the guy who beat him, thus proving to yourself that you've achieved that level of skill. Basically, through the transitive property of sword fighting, Ned Stark is the guy who Jaime Lannister needs to beat to prove that he's better than Arthur Dayne, because Ned Stark is the only guy who's ever beaten Arthur Dayne in single combat, and Jaime's never probably even seen Ned fight very much, other than a little bit maybe during the Greyjoy Rebellion. This is why the first thing Jaime brings up at the feast when they see each other is how excited he is that there's going to be a tournament when Ned is named hand, and he hopes that they get to fight each other in the tournament. And Ned, of course, says that he won't fight in tournaments, which, of course, very much disappoints Jaime for all the reasons that I just laid out. Now, of course, in the television show, when we see what actually happened at the Tower of Joy, according to the TV show at least, Ned actually didn't defeat Arthur Dayne in single combat with a sword the way that basically all of Westeros thinks he did. And this will probably be also a similar situation in the books. Ned says that he would have died but for Howland Reed, so it seems pretty clear that Ned didn't actually 1v1 Arthur Dayne and win a sword fight, but Jaime Lannister and the rest of Westeros don't actually know this. As far as most people are concerned, they haven't ever seen Ned Stark fight with a sword, but they all basically know that he has to be one of the most badass sword fighters that the world has ever seen. It's also worth noting that at this point in the story, Jaime is probably the best sword fighter in all of the realm, and he really doesn't respect any of the Kingsguard who are supposed to be the other best sword fighters in the world. He's seen all of them, he knows he's better than them, other than maybe Sir Barristan himself, and Jaime basically doesn't respect anyone because he's been fighting and winning so long in all of these melees and these tournaments, and probably also in the training yard, that he's basically like a chess player who's beaten everyone there is to beat, except for the one guy who he absolutely really wants to beat, the guy who beat his idol, and then retired, never giving him a chance to prove that he was the best. I'm sure I'll have had the quote up at various points in this video, but there's a point where Jaime Lannister is basically talking about how all of the swordsmen in the Kingsguard today are terrible, and how all of the ones that he learned from back in the day, like Sir Arthur Dayne and Gerald Hightower, were all so much better. And Jaime wants to prove that he's on that level, but as we said, he's never going to be able to. Unless he gets to fight and defeat Ned Stark. This is why Jaime wants to fight Ned so badly, and this is why he seems to basically be enjoying himself as he's finally getting this opportunity to have a 1v1 with Ned with real swords in the street when Ned is really trying. He is realizing throughout the fight that he is winning. Because let's leave no doubt, Jaime Lannister is a better swordsman than Ned Stark. As this fight is going on, Jaime will be realizing this, and he will be realizing he is eventually going to win, and he's eventually going to be winning his version of the Super Bowl, his version of the heavyweight championship. He's finally about to prove to himself, once and for all, and prove to everyone else as well, that he's able to beat the guy 1v1 who beat Arthur Dayne 1v1. And then all of a sudden, some random guard stabs Ned in the back of the leg and robs Jaime of that opportunity forever. Little does Jaime know that this is probably very similar to the way that Ned defeated Arthur Dayne in the first place. Like, I know that this is show only stuff, but it's actually pretty crazy to realize how similar these two situations are. Both Jaime and Ned have had their sibling captured, they have gone to try and get them back, and they have ended up in a sword fight with the honorable badass who is basically holding their sibling captive. Both of these two men that they are fighting against get stabbed in the back, and whereas Ned delivers the finishing blow to Arthur Dayne, Jaime sits there and gets mad that his fair fight has been taken from him and doesn't deliver a finishing blow on Ned Stark. I suppose it could even be argued that this makes Jaime more honorable than Ned when faced with the exact same situation, something that Jaime himself will never have any idea of, but Ned Stark, when he thinks about it, could recognize the similarities of these situations and realize that where Ned slashed Arthur Dayne open, Jaime let Ned live. There's an argument to be made that in this moment, Jaime proved his honor to Ned Stark in a way that Jaime himself could never fully comprehend. All that Jaime is aware of is that his opportunity of a lifetime, his ability to prove himself to finally be the best, to finally prove to himself that he is better than the one that he idolized growing up, has just been taken from him. And that's why he's so mad, and that's why he punches his own man in the face. There was a lot more than just a sword fight going on there in the streets of King's Landing, and a lot of it was taking place in the head of Jaime Lannister, and to me, that's what makes this scene so amazing, and definitely without a doubt, one of the best scenes in Game of Thrones that didn't happen in the books. Thank you very much for watching, make sure to like and subscribe if you've made it this far, and I'll be back with something else very soon.